Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Quintero,
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye. Okay. Is there any public expression on subjects not on the agenda? Seeing none, I need a motion to adopt the minutes.
So moved.
I'll second. I'm going to end up abstaining on the vote because I wasn't here.
Okay.
Director Bragman,
Abstain.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Quintero,
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye. Okay, number 2, contract number 1918, Anderson Drive rectifier anode.
Hi, good morning. I'm here to present the Anderson Drive rectifier anode replacement project. The project will be constructed.
I'm sorry, can you have the mic in front of you?
Can you hear me? I'm here to present the Anderson Drive rectifier anode replacement project. The project will be constructed near the intersection of Anderson Drive and West Francisco Boulevard in San Rafael. The project will replace an existing cathodic protection well that was installed in 1997 with a new 10-inch diameter, 150-foot deep cathodic protection well and backfill and abandon the existing well. My engineer's estimate for this project is $105,000, and bids will open up on February 25th. This project is scheduled to last 90 days with a completion date of June 15th, 2020. If all bid documents are acceptable, staff will make a recommendation at the March 17th board meeting for contract award. The recommended action is for review and referral to a future regular meeting of the Board of Directors with the Operations Committee's recommendation to proceed with the project.
Why are we replacing it
Uh,
as opposed to just rehabilitating it?
The corrosion department has determined that there is an issue with the anode wells themselves, and they're not getting any current out of it. And it has been determined through a series of troubleshooting tests that it's necessary to drill a new well and install 6 new anodes to protect roughly 14,000 feet of pipe.
So it is sacrificial. 'Cause I thought it was a rectifier.
It's a rectifier cabinet that's putting compressed current on magnesium anodes, and the anodes are putting out 0 current at this time. So it's been estimated that there's an issue in the anode well, and they're not protecting the pipe, so they've become obsolete.
Isn't that a little unusual to impress a current on a magnesium anode? Usually use an inert anode when it's being impressed.
So for a more technical question like that, I'm going to defer to our corrosion expert, Gary Anderson.
Good morning.
Morning, thank you.
So, yeah, it's, they're not mag anodes, they're silicon cast iron anodes.
Oh, okay.
And we're not sure what failed, but something below
Something-
the seal
something let go,
failed.
huh?
Yeah, and we looked into the idea of possibly drilling out the well but it was just as costly to do that as to drill another well. So,
Okay.
What's the normal life expectancy of a piece of equipment like that?
design life is 20. I think this is a premature failure.
Well, I didn't have any idea, but that jumped out at me as a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, but if it's 20, I mean, it's 23, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the ballpark.
Given the amount of current it was putting out, I would have thought we'd gotten more life out of it, but something failed under.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Can I get a motion to refer it to the board?
Yeah. Second?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Director Bragman,
Need to vote for that.
Well, do we or not?
It's fine, yeah. Okay, item number 3, proposed waiver of water meter requirements and/or connection. No, Armando. Proposed waiver of water meter requirements and/or connection fees for certain qualifying accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, good morning, members of the board.
Good morning.
Today, we're bringing that proposal to you. Since 2016, the California State Legislature has been changing many of the laws dealing with ADUs to open up more affordable housing alternatives in the state. Last December, the district adopted Ordinance 445, reflecting the most recent changes to state law. Even with the recent changes to state law, new construction ADUs, both attached and detached, that have improvements exceeding 150 square feet outside their existing footprint are subject to district connection fees, and the detached units require separate water meter for their installation to meet district code. At the December meeting, the board expressed a desire for staff to bring back additional waivers of district requirements to further assist in opening up affordable housing to the district service area. For example, with current district code, connection fees for attached ADUs 750 square foot or less and detached ADUs 400 square feet and less, the connection fee is $2,800 or less than $2,800. For larger ADUs, there's a sliding scale based on single-family residential consumption, and it's not to exceed $8,300. And I do have that information, but it's a little detailed for this right now, unless you would like the details. Last year, we processed 18 ADUs, and 15 of those ADUs we processed paid less than $2,800 in connection fees. However, the larger cost for ADUs is the installation cost of the separate water meter for detached structures only. There are three major costs associated with this requirement. The installation cost for labor and materials for district forests to install a 1-inch meter is just over $7,100. But in addition to that, the paving is an additional cost, and the district requires an $8,000 deposit, where standard street opening is required, and a $16,000 deposit on moratorium streets. However, the customer only pays the actual cost of the paving performed. In addition, private piping from the new meter to the new detached ADU can be significantly more in cost, especially if they have to run a long ways, like 100 feet or more in a shared easement driveway. And sometimes this could even double the cost of the water meter installation, but the customer is responsible for that cost and do all that digging and that stuff privately. We had a recent applicant estimated the total cost of installation of a new service for an ADU between $20,000 and $25,000, and this included only the $2,800 connection fee. And it was pointed out to me earlier that our table 2 didn't itemize out the $2,800, but that's kind of our standard cost for most of these ADUs going in. Mm-hmm. So, if the board is interested in expanding the types of ADUs that are not required to pay connection fees and not be separately metered, the district staff recommends the following criteria. Only one ADU or JADU or JDU, junior accessory dwelling unit, shall exist on a single-family residential lot with a proposed or existing single-family dwelling, and the total floor area for the newly constructed attached or detached ADU shall not exceed 50% of the floor area of the single-family dwelling, or 1,200 square feet in floor area, whichever is smaller. In addition, the space has exterior access from the proposed or existing single-family dwelling, and the side and rear setbacks are sufficient for fire and safety. So, with that criteria for the ADUs and JDUs, we bring you three options available to the committee for proposed qualifying new construction ADUs as follows. Option 1 would be direct staff to remove the requirement for the installation of a separate water meter for qualifying ADUs, but still maintain the requirement for qualifying ADUs to pay connection fees.
I don't understand that.
I'm sorry.
Well, so
Is there supposed to be a non in there somewhere? I mean, it says installation of a separate water meter for qualifying ADUs, but still maintain the requirement for qualifying ADUs?
to pay the connection
To pay the
fee.
connection fees.
So what we're doing for clarity in the recommendations are distinguishing between two issues that we have at hand that reflect cost to the customers as they build an ADU. One is a connection fee, and the other is a requirement for a meter that's a much costlier item because it at times, right, has lengths and
Yeah, Jim, please
disrupts the
explain.
paving and that sort of stuff. In fact, the example that Paul gave, 90% of those costs to that customer were associated with the meter requirement. So alternative one is essentially maintaining the rate structure and the connection fee, which in that case would just be 10% of the cost, but waiving the requirement for a separate meter that doesn't have the intersection with the rate structure and 218 issues, and it's a more discretionary type item that, that makes sense in this context for staff. So
Thank you,
you
Ben.
want to go through 2 and 3?
Yes, thank you, Ben. Option 2, direct staff to remove the requirement also for the water meter and waive 50% of the required connection fees. However, we'll have to use non-rate revenue to cover the cost of the connection fee waivers to be in compliance with 218, as Ben mentioned. And option 3 is to direct staff to remove the requirement for the installation of the water meter and waive 100% of the connection fees.
So, my perspective in this is I would urge the board to really consider alternative one, because that is reducing anywhere from 75 to 90% of the typical costs for ADUs without disrupting kind of a core tenet of our rate structure, which is new customers buy into the system, additions to the system buy in. And while the current read is, legal read, that we could do that with non-rate revenue, I believe it's a non-tested issue. We're trying to confirm that, and it just does raise potential future complexities that waiving the meter would not.
Okay. So, I've been encouraging us to expand our exemption, and appreciate the staff report and everybody's comments. So, I was 14 years on the Fairfax Council, and ADUs were sort of the hope we had of really expanding and sort of creating housing opportunities without new development. 881, which is what kind of brought us here, is a very blunt instrument and really overrides local planning. So that has created a bit of a backlash about this. For example, in Fairfax, 881 eliminates parking requirements if you're within a half a mile of a bus stop. Well, within a half a mile of a bus stop, you're in what's called the WUI section, the wildland urban interface. You've got issues with fire, getting people out of the neighborhood during a fire on these narrow roads. And if you eliminate parking, they're going to be parking on the road, and people are going to get trapped in these really narrow roadways. So that all being said, the local jurisdictions do retain some planning authority over this. There is some discretion in 881, but the local jurisdictions have to provide factual evidence for making any kind of exception to 881, and I think they will. I think there is empirical facts on the ground in places up in the hills in Fairfax, Mill Valley, et cetera, where there are going to be exceptions to this. That all being said, our perspective's a little bit different because we're not really in that planning. We don't have that planning authority, but we do have the financial authority as the utility. So it's a little bit of a different look at the issue, which is interesting to me after having spent so much time on the town council. And really what I would like to see us do is expand it to eliminate really what is only a financial impediment. And I've had this come up numerous times when I was on the Fairfax Council and even in talking to some of the residents in Division 3, who I think are here today, who are interested in building an ADU for good reasons. But, you know, the financial cost, upfront cost of a new meter is just overwhelming, and it really, it skews the whole financial calculus of going forward. So I have a little bit, I think the staff report is excellent. There are a couple issues I want to put on the table that I think we should consider just for equity's sake, and also just to take into consideration that there is going to be a little bit of opposition, maybe not here today, hopefully, but these are just some things that I.
Position from whom?
Yeah. Where would
Let me just, there's just some limitations I think we should put on it. First of all, as staff recommended, I think it should be for an existing home, not a new home. So I think we want to encourage infill. We don't want to encourage new development, nor do we necessarily want to give financial breaks to developers to come in and sort of double down on speculative development. So I think we should have a limitation that it should be today's consideration should be for existing single-family homes. I think those homes should
Does that include a knockdown?
if they're an existing customer. So that was my other condition. Existing home, existing MMD customer. I think we should make a requirement that the main home should be owner-occupied, again, to deter speculation. Another condition that I think we should consider is that we should require the owner to install water-conserving fixtures and utilities in the new ADU and the existing home. And that would sort of parallel the requirements we just discussed on Tier 3, Tier 4. So we really already have that.
Would you see that going on to gray water?
Yeah, yeah,
Seems it should to me.
yeah, I think so.
I mean, aren't they already obligated to put in?
Yes, I think they are, actually.
Well, they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Whether they do or not. But
If it's practicable, if it's.
no, but if it's not, I mean, they still have to put in low water usage.
Yes.
In order to get a permit, to build it,
Yes.
they're gonna have to put in.
Yeah, but what I'm suggesting is that we require that they put water-conserving fixtures in the existing home as well.
Sure.
And again, the new homes would not be exempted from the connection fee. Again, new homes, not existing homes. So, and as far as the connection fee, it's an interesting idea. I mean, my take on it is these are already existing customers that have paid a connection fee. So to me, there's a distinction there on Prop 218. But I also understand your concern about that.
Let me ask you about that. You're saying a distinction that you think doesn't require us to use non-rate funds.
They've already paid a connection fee.
No, I understand the logic, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, yes.
Well, that's an interesting question. There's two potential ways to interpret what you said. One is suggesting you don't have to do non-rate revenue. The other one is more supporting alternative 3 of going ahead and waiving both the meter requirement and the connection fee.
Essentially, yeah.
And one kind of, not a middle ground, but one consideration would be, in some cases, the ADU would trigger the need for an upsized meter. And then in that case, under that argument or point, it could make sense to go ahead and charge the connection fee in those circumstances.
We upsized our meter when we added a couple bedrooms. It is very expensive. The paving really
Right.
kills you. We did not, I don't think we paid a more connection fee, a bigger additional connection fee. to do
Right, but
that.
in this case, right, it's an explicit waiver. So I was just wondering if it would make sense under that approach that it would be conditional on the ability to use the same meter size for the ADU.
That's something for the board to consider. My thought going into it is that we, there are some instances where the addition of the ADU will, just from an engineering point of view, it's going to require a bigger meter. So,
Well, isn't the ADU going to have fire sprinklers?
not under 881.
Oh.
No.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we should still encourage people to put fire sprinklers in. And I don't think we want to get in the middle of that. Right. But it seems to me that I don't follow the rationale that the lateral has to be changed in an upsized meter. I mean, that may be our policy, but I don't think that's true from a hydraulic standpoint. The meter is much more of a constriction in that line than the line is. So I think we should really give some thought to whether you need to change the lateral. If you're going to go from 5/8 to 3/4 or 3/4 to 1, I really doubt there's any engineering rationale for changing the lateral.
Can I clarify that?
Sure.
From 5/8 to 3/4, we almost all the time have a 3/4 inch line going over to the meter already. We just replace the water meter and any fittings that are required, and that cost is only $290. But if you go to a 1-inch meter, you have to upsize to a 1-inch lateral if you don't have that size.
Why? That's what I'm asking you. Does it exceed code?
Well, it has been our district standard all along.
I understand that,
and
Paul.
and
What
you know,
I'm at-
depending upon the length of it and the hydraulics of it. I mean, if someone was to calculate out and say we need a 1-inch meter, but a 5-foot, or a 10-foot lateral is okay. The people that do the calculations for that are the fire sprinkler contractors, and that's who's driving the meter sizing that we need.
Fire sprinkler is a different situation than we're talking about. I understand that for fire sprinkler. And if there's a rationale, like I said, what velocity standard do we use in the lateral?
We don't. I don't know that exact velocity standard that we're
If you
using.
could find that out, I'd appreciate
Sure.
it, because code is 8 feet per second. So
Okay.
if that's the number, then I can understand that. If we're exceeding that, then we have a potential difficulty. Of course, it's statistical, huh? So, there's two different situations. When the fire's running, if it's drawing more than 8 feet per second, how long is it going to draw that for? Minutes, hour? It's not really representative of the usage for that lateral. Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that we should give some serious thought to, because I'm responding to your question about the need to dig up the pavement to get the lateral. That's where the real cost is.
Yep.
Changing the meter out is hundreds of dollars.
Right.
And the other part is thousands.
Right.
So I think we should give some real serious thought to whether we need to change the laterals or not. I mean, we may have a policy that says we wish to change the lateral for other reasons, which is its age or something like that. These are primarily copper laterals?
We have a mix of all sorts of types out there. Sometimes we have older galvanized. Oh, all our new ones, when we put in a new meter, even if we put in a 5/8 meter, we put in a 1-inch copper lateral.
And previously, did we use polybutylene or any of this
We have
plastics? We have some. No, not many. Okay. So anyway, I think that deserves a look, and like I say, you hear when they say it needs to be X. Well, if that's a pressure drop from there, for instance, where I live, we have 135 PSI at the tap. So, I can't envision a situation where we would have a need, if you upgraded your meter from whatever size to whatever size, it's going to exceed the head loss drop across that 20 feet of lateral that would affect something like a fire sprinkler. It's possible, but it's unlikely.
Okay.
So, situations should be looked at on the actual numbers, huh? If we have a standard that says we can't have more than 20 PSI pressure drop across that lateral, okay. If we're exceeding that, then that's okay. I don't have a problem with it. But I think to just say that because the meter's being upgraded, we need to upgrade the lateral, which then creates a whole series of other problems, which the primary one, because we just had MCI come through my neighborhood and rip up our brand new fought for paving that we've been fighting for 25 years to get, leaving me a little unhappy, needless to say. But you have the same situation. And then you get this other situation, PG&E opened up a spot not too far from my house, and there's a pavement patch bigger than this table for an access. That's what they had to end up paving, was something like 20 by 40, maybe it's even all the way across the street for one transformer they had to get to. So I think we need to be careful here that, we're not just blanketing everybody with the same brush. Going further, and I presume we're going to hear more from you about the three alternatives or not?
Yeah, I mean, I can weigh
Go ahead.
in. My initial thought, I didn't really scrutinize it as closely as staff has, and pulling out the different figures for connection fee. I actually thought the connection fee was much higher. But given the policy driving the change, I would certainly want to, I'd like to see us just waive those fees entirely. I don't know, of the 19 we approved last year, how many of them were separate new ADUs?
About half.
So it's a relatively small amount of revenue that we'd be losing. And to me, really, the signal that we're trying to send here is that we support this. We want to take away the financial impediments and encourage it. And, the local municipalities are going to have the final filter on this. So there's going to be a much finer look at each individual unit. But from our perspective as a policy signal, really the signal is we want to eliminate the financial barriers for homeowners to do this.
Yeah.
So that is where
Yeah,
I'm at.
I absolutely agree with that. I think we want to do what we can to relieve pressures on the housing problems that we have in the community, no question about it. And I particularly am interested in your thought of the possibility of not having to use go under the terms of the 218 restriction that we got to use non-ratepayer funds. Now, that does raise a question for me, and that is, I haven't seen recently what's the size of the pool of non-ratepayer funds that we have to move around here.
So we've looked at that. We get quite a bit of non-rate revenue, almost in the range of $3 million a year. Our last COSA used a significant portion of that to offset rate increases, which raised a short-term complication in how much can be tapped. But regardless, with the numbers of ADUs we've had in the past and the dollars we're talking about were you to waive the connection fee, we're comfortable at this point that we'd be able to use the non-rate revenue to cover it.
So that pool of funds is not impactful on the decisions we're making here.
Correct.
And it seems to me that one of the conditions that should be added to this is that you cannot irrigate from the ADU connection. Because that, I think, basically eliminates the demand. Then we've only got the people's demand. So that if you can't spring an irrigation line off, because you could see a situation where you could split your irrigation to stay in a lower tier by taking some off of 1 meter versus the other meter, in a case where you have 2 meters. But if we restricted the second meter to having no irrigation allowed on it, now, don't ask me how to enforce it.
There's not going to be a second meter, though.
I understand that, but I'm talking about the ones, well, then I'm completely confused about what this qualifying ADU is. Does that mean it's exempt, or that means it needs it?
It means it would not, we would be eliminating the requirement for a separate meter.
But then why are we talking about the connection fees?
Good, that's
Because there's,
a good question.
well, there's two sets of impacts, financial impacts to our customers based on our current policies. One is the requirement for a new meter, and the other is the application of a connection fee to these structures. So there's both.
But connection fee, Ben, has always historically been tied to a meter, at least as far as I know.
Well,
No.
go ahead.
Excuse me. If someone converts, one structure, single-family living unit into 2 living units, they have to pay a connection fee to put in that second living unit currently.
With the same meter?
with the same meter. So you're having 2 living units instead of 1. They have to pay the, for their accessory dwelling unit, their added unit, based on how many square feet they're adding for another living unit.
Is that realistic? Do people actually do that?
Yes, we've been doing it since 1987.
I understand that, but I'm saying, do they actually do what you're talking about? I understand we've had a policy, but does it actually occur? I don't see how that would happen. You're talking about somebody making a duplex out of a single family?
And chances are, because they're doing these modifications to their residence, they have to, get a building permit. They're going to be required to put in fire sprinklers. They're going to be required to upgrade their water meter. They come in the door here. We get a letter from the local planner that lets us know what's going on, and we let them know that they need to purchase a connection fee for that.
Right, but it seems to me now we're back into the fee, the capital fee. I don't understand why, if someone is doing something that causes them to put fire sprinklers in, it doesn't mean they're going to use more water, even if they have a larger meter. So I think this whole policy needs to be relooked at because, I understand we have a table. I got that. Okay. The question is, Paul, whether we need that table, because I don't see what changing the meter size has to do with the demand on the system necessarily. It may. I mean, if indeed they were going from a single family home to a duplex, I suppose one could argue that there's some more impact, but let's be frank, the real impact comes from irrigation, not from the people that live in the houses.
Could I just add one other thing? My thought going into it was we've already created a class of ADUs pursuant to 881 that don't pay connection fees. So, that was my thought. I didn't really dive into the weeds and really understand the whole connection fee requirement for subdivision of an existing single-family residence, which is another question, I think. But for purposes of what we're doing today, it just seems like we created this class of ADUs under 881 a few months ago. This is expanding it to meet really what I think is the most common planning construction for Marin County, which is a single-family home. Owner decides, hey, I'd like to put in an ADU for a parent or a child or whatever. That's the most common scenario you run into. So to me, my thought going into it was we've already done this under 881. Let's send the signal as a district that we're going to eliminate the financial impediment for this other class of ADUs that are most commonly constructed in our county.
Well, and like I say, if we don't allow irrigation from that connection, however it's connected, I think it addresses, the amount of irrigation for the lot size is actually decreasing,
That's true.
irrigatable.
That could be added to the water conserving fixture requirement that I've recommended or that I would recommend. So, it'd be a little additional requirement to have landscape conservation.
Armando, you have any thoughts on this?
No, it's been a really interesting discussion, and I think that it sounds like we might not be ready to go forward with this. To me, if we've got a broader set of questions to address, but I know some folks in San Rafael who do have ADUs, and they actually make them available for below market rates. People who are working in the community or going to Dominican or other areas, and I think that there's I don't know that it falls within our purview to make that also the kind of thing that could make a difference in how the ADU is going to be managed by the homeowner. But I really like the direction of this conversation. But I'm still waiting to see what we want to go forward with in terms of direction. I don't have any other direction to offer other than I think this discussion has been rich. And also, I think we've all been really interested in getting this ADU hurdle or getting over this ADU hurdle because we all recognize the value to the community and the need I'll wait and see where we end up, what we end up in terms of recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I think we've heard enough for the moment. Can we open it up to the public?
Sure, I think so. too.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Any comments?
We have
Come on up.
we have 5 public speakers.
Okay. Go ahead and fill out the card. It doesn't hurt. It's not totally necessary, but fine, if you would mind.
So can we please have Peter Anderson of the First Presbyterian, San Anselmo?
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you one more time. We have a housing crisis, not a plumbing crisis. California is home to more than 150,000 homeless people, nearly a quarter of the nation's total who are living in the streets, in cars, any place where they can find shelter. According to opinion polls, homelessness is the top issue that residents want the governor and state legislation to address. Delivering his annual State of the State speech to the legislature, Governor Newsom said it's a disgrace that the richest state in the richest nation is falling so far behind to properly house, heal, and humanly treat so many of its own people. The MMWD Water Board has an opportunity to do the right thing by removing meter requirements and connection fees in most situations for existing homes, following appropriate guidelines that Director Bragman just outlined, and I think they are spot on, and they should be enforced. We need more housing now, and granny units are a good baby step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
One more thing. This is a quote from the city manager of Lafayette, who just retired. Actually, he's kind of forced out because he's working hard for expanded housing in a community that's a lot like Fairfax, where we're doing a lot to make sure this doesn't happen. All cities, even small ones, have a responsibility to address the most significant challenges of our time: climate change, income inequality, and housing affordability.
Thank you, Peter.
Next, we have Marcia Mather Thrift of San Rafael.
Good morning, board members. I would like to speak about this issue as a private citizen. I have been a nonprofit executive all my life, really, and have just retired from managing a National Park Supporting Association. Our ADU, which is pretty much ready to go, has been approved and permitted, is my husband's and my retirement strategy. And it's also a long-term aging in place strategy. We've spent a lot on our kids' education, so we're not fancy, well-off Marin residents. We've been planning this ADU. I had now had some time to start working on it. Everything is falling in place except for the fact of this huge water meter requirement fee and the connection fee. So I'm very concerned, of course, personally. And we're also, looking at the opportunity to provide housing, which is important too. We all know that, and it will be a place where maybe a college student can live, or a single mom, or someone like that. It's a little over 400 square feet. And there's, and as you can imagine with building, there's one requirement after another: building permits, sanitary connection, and so on. So it's really important to consider this. It's important infill. It's important for people like us who want to stay in the county and be near our kids. Luckily, our kids are making a lot more than we are. But, we don't want to burden them and be in their home. So I'd really like you to consider acting on this sooner rather than later, because I'm sure there are other people out there who are in our situation, and the housing need is dire. So please consider acting on this, and please consider waiving that water meter requirement and also waiving the connection fee requirement. Thank you.
Marcia.
Thanks a lot.
Don't read our discussion as any intent to delay. So it's just to flush it out.
Next, we have Royce Tro of First Presbyterian San Anselmo and Kentfield resident.
Good morning. My focus is on individuals, just like we've just heard. it's pretty clear to all of us, I think, that our society is organized primarily to benefit those who have a lot. And what you're talking about is the opportunity to give an advantage to those who don't have so much. And I'm very encouraged by the conversation and hope that you continue to do this rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Next, we have Tom McAfee of First Presbyterian Church, San Anselmo, and Fairfax resident.
Hi, good morning, directors. I am connected with First Presbyterian Church, and you may recall that the meeting, I guess it was in December, we maybe had a dozen representatives from First Presbyterian here, and I would encourage you to revisit their testimony. I think the assumption at that time was that you would have been addressing the issue going forward as well as the requirements for existing structures, because it only seemed to make sense to us that what applied to an existing structure would also apply to one going forward, especially now with the requirements and stipulations that Director Bragman has put forth. It makes all the sense in the world. It should really mitigate any worries about the speculators coming in and multimillionaires coming in doing things strictly for a profit. This is not the case. We know we're in a housing crisis for affordable housing, and that's just the way it is. I also I'm a freelance videographer, and I recently filmed the convention, the 10-year convention of the Marin Organizing Committee. Their main issue is addressing affordable housing, or one of their main issues, one of many. And they can't be here today because there's a convention going on in Oakland because of the homeless crisis. But believe me, there is a tremendous support for doing whatever we can to keep people from falling through the cracks. And this is a mechanism whereby it's a step in the right direction. If you're worried about the cars and the parking and the overflow of that, well, guess what? There's a limited amount of space on the road for cars, and they will be there. However, if you restrict affordable housing, it's more likely that you're going to find people living in those cars rather than simply the cars being there. I would just say that the last time I was here, I said I was really proud to live in a county, and like Peter was saying, that is doing the right thing and it is in the right direction, because folks, it takes a village. It just takes a village. When I see homeless people, when I see people struggling to make it, it's your granny, it's my granny, it's all our grannies or uncles or kids or whatever.
Or it's us.
Or it's us. Exactly right. Exactly right. And we're in it together, and I really appreciate what you're doing. I strongly support option 3. And with the stipulations that Director Bragman has put in, I think it makes all the sense in the world, and encourage you to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Next, we have Ron Vestal of First Presbyterian Church of San Anselmo and Green Bay resident.
Good morning, Board. I'm Ron Vestal, lived in Green Bay. I'm a 40-plus year homeowner, Marin classroom teacher for over 30 years. I've witnessed the drastic change of housing opportunities in recent years for workers needed by the community to function. The changes has made it difficult, bordering on impossible, for many workers to live in the county. Option 3 on these waivers on meter requirements and connection fees seem like a true opportunity to help ease the housing situation for workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Next, we have Susan Kerschel of Mill Valley.
Good morning, and like others, I want to thank you for taking up this issue and all of the efforts that we're all called on to be able to see what we can do about housing and maintaining affordability for everyone as much as possible. I think you've gotten a little bit ahead of yourself in terms of what's happening with ADU legislation in the state. And I know it's been true in Mill Valley, that Mill Valley spent a whole lot of time developing systems and structures to control ADUs to be able to make sure that it was actually going to be providing affordable housing. But if you remember what happened in our legislation at the end of 2019 is legislators didn't just pass 881. Actually, they clustered together 4 different bills around ADU legislation. They didn't pass their legislation until November or so. The governor signed it. But now what's going on is that there's a whole new attempt to cluster all of the requirements of ADUs under a new housing bill called Senate Bill 773, so that whatever you're considering right now might end up going through changes. And at least as I understand it from what the current legislation is that the whole scenario in the state is changing with top-down, one-size-fits-all legislation. And a part of what that means for ADUs is that we have kind of the typical thing. You've got your house, and you can add in a junior ADU within your house, separate entrance, all of that. So that has 2 pieces of property then that are functioning as living units. But in addition to that, the new state law adds the fact that there can be a separate structure, and I think it's either 1,000 or 1,200 square foot structure, which is separate from the main house and the junior ADU. And in addition to that, there can be a second structure independent on the grounds that can be as much as 500 square feet. So as you'd be considering any kind of waivers or additional fees or pipe sizes, until we know about how this legislation 773 is going to shake out in Sacramento, it seems like you could be making decisions that will come back to bite us or maybe not, but that it's premature to look at what the waivers are going to be. And your intentions here, I think, are really admirable, because we do want the whatever conditions we give to support affordable housing to be working. But the biggest danger of all of this legislation is that it no longer requires owner occupancy in any of those units. So not having owner occupancy in any of those units just increases that vulnerability to all of our communities and our individuals who are trying to do the right thing by bringing accessory dwelling units and having that be affordable housing. But I mean, our legislators are out of control, in my opinion, about this issue, and to be careful about being caught up in their mismanagement of problem solving to solve the housing crisis.
Thank you, Susan. Recognize, of course, that what is set can be changed. So, if we find out that it's a problem for us, the direction we've chosen, we can change the direction. So, we're not cast in concrete here. We're fairly fluid in the future. So I think we can probably adjust to whatever the legislature does to us. I think the basic fundamentals don't change, though, which is the issue we have here, and trying to remove costs that are impacting folks moving forward.
Just to say, I think the big thing that might that might change is with this is that it opens the door for more corporate ownership of housing rather than individual ownership.
I understood what you said.
Okay.
And Director Bragman has added in the part about owner-occupied. Right. So I think we've addressed that.
Right, that's what we're
but we
addressing.
really appreciate your comments, and they're very taken to heart.
Next, we have Linda Jackson of Aging Action Initiative of San Rafael.
Good morning to the board and staff and the phone. I'm here, Linda Jackson. I'm with the Aging Action Initiative, and you've heard from some older people here in Marin about the extreme challenges that homeowners are facing, not just for themselves to keep their homes, but to also maintain it, but to have healthcare workers and caregivers who are going to be around. You know that I looked up for the jobs here at MMWD that are open right now. It's engineers and lab techs and maintenance jobs. So you know how desperate the need is. Just for your agency, let alone everybody else. I want to note that in adopting these, you want to look out for the unintended consequences. So if the goal is to actually encourage the second units, accessory dwelling units, which is what the previous speaker talked about. This is what the state of California needs, and we need to be adopting it. So I would say for the new prohibition or the requirement that there be 2 meters for a new home and an accessory dwelling unit might be one of those. There is a demand for multi-generational housing, and there's a need by younger families when they buy a home to have a second unit to help pay the mortgage. So if a developer wants to put in 1 meter for the house and a little unit, allow that flexibility for that. There's so few opportunities for new single family in this county.
I think
so
we
that-
would, because
Okay,
it
I
would
just
be
want
owner occupied, so I don't think
well,
there'd be any issue
no,
there.
I just want to say, allow that option for that there could be 1 meter for a house and a little unit. The second one is there is state law that passed that you cannot require owner occupancy anymore. So I worked in San Rafael as a planner for many years. That was a keystone element, and that can no longer be required. So I'd encourage to look at the bills that were passed last year and double check on that. It's for 5 years. So that was the compromise on it, because there is a concern that there might be, non-owners buying up homes and building second units. I'm not so sure that'll happen here in Marin, but certainly in other parts of the state. So it's a 5-year window. So I'd be cautious about, as an public entity, adopting that criteria in conflict with the state law. The other one is a JDU and an ADU are allowed on the same lot. A JDU has already been permitted. It's already been planned for. It's coming out of the existing square footage. It can be reversed. So it is basically the single family house. The accessory dwelling unit is the new thing that's in the backyard, and that's where what you're talking about and how to facilitate those. So it's a moot point. You can have the state law, the one that was passed, said yes, you can do that in your house, and you can have a little unit in the backyard. So I thank you for moving forward on this, adopting it. You can always revisit, like you said, if the rules change, you can always revisit it, but it's so critical to do today. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Barbara Bogard of Mill Valley and the Sierra Club.
Good morning. Thank you. This was a really encouraging conversation to hear where you folks are coming from about this issue. And I think we all agree that ADUs are great, that they're potentially one of the least painful ways to help us address the lack of reasonably priced housing in Marin County. This morning I was in the shower counting I have 6 friends in the last 2 years who have been forced, not by choice, forced to move out of Marin County. I'm 72 years old. They're my age. They can't afford to live here anymore. So we need to do something to help people, to ease the financial burdens on people who are often living on fixed incomes, and to eliminate any unnecessary impediments that we can. Let's face it, the people who are going to want to build ADUs for the most part are not the wealthiest people in Marin County. Really, really rich people aren't going to have JDUs or ADUs on their property. They don't need them. So we're talking about people who don't have an infinite amount of money, and anything we can do to help them stay is really important. I have heard people object to this, but the objections that I've heard have all centered around the fact that we don't want to encourage people to come in and speculate or house flipping, that kind of thing. So I think that Director Bragman's restrictions that he added to this will address those issues. And thank you again. I encourage you to adopt the third alternative, eliminating the water meters and all connection fees. Thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Marjorie Sun of San Anselmo.
Good morning. I'm encouraged by your discussion this morning as well. And I would encourage you to reform the ordinance. Again, my name is Marjorie Sun, and I've been a resident of Marin for 24 years, and all that time I've been a ratepayer. I want to tell you my story to underscore your discussion today, and I think it supports it. I'm a homeowner in San Anselmo now. I'm building an ADU in my backyard, and I'm here today to advocate that you adopt reforms on the connection fees and the water meters. My ADU is detached, and as I understand the district regulations now, having a detached ADU, no matter what the size, triggers very expensive fees. But before I get to that, I want to tell you my story about living in Marin. So I lived in Sleepy Hollow for 18 years, and after a divorce, I moved to Corte Madera for a few years. But I kept dreaming of moving back to San Anselmo because I've built so many relationships there. I've been a lay leader at St. John's Episcopal Church in Ross for nearly two decades. I'm retired now after heading up a nonprofit to fight climate change. So about a year and a half ago, I finally found my dream house in San Anselmo in the Storage Park area. And I'm building this small ADU. And it's to serve three goals. It's a way for me to do my part to relieve the housing shortage, albeit one tenant at a time. 2, since I'm retired, it'll be a source of income. 3, if and when the time comes, a caretaker can stay there so I can age in place. And so now some details about my ADU. It's a whopping 416 square feet, and it's detached for one person in my backyard. But even though it's so small, if I understand the current regulations, the new service will cost me, water service will cost me more than $10,000 plus all the repaving fees, which could amount to thousands of dollars. For comparison, I called the Santa Rosa Water District. It would charge no connection fees for any ADU under 750 square feet, which mine is. So as you all know, the state has passed legislation to promote more affordable housing, but these fees by MMWD currently don't support this, and it's a major financial burden. I really get it to encourage water conservation. I can do this with my detached ADU. My contractor has told me that I can install a second meter on my existing line to measure how much water the tenant is using, and I can bill the tenant, but at much less upfront cost than under the current district rules. So again, as I understand the district rules, because my little ADU is detached, I'm whacked with these big fees. So I asked the board to change the ordinances to cut the fees for small detached ADUs. They're an enormous financial burden for me, homeowners like me, and a barrier to solving our housing crisis. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Marjorie. Armando, any further comment?
Yeah, I like your metaphor, Larry, when you said that this was a fluid situation. And I actually think understanding what we're all hearing and what we all want to do, I would recommend that ADUs be an agenda item every quarter for this, for the doc. Because I think as has been expressed, there's going to be new information coming out. There's going to be new experiences both from the ADU owner experience as well as MMWD staff and team experience in working with all of this. And I think it would just be important to have updates for the board and the public, and and basically make it so that we are adapting effectively as we go forward. And I think we all want to do.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to see us move forward. I understand there's all kinds of activity in Sacramento, but if we were to be held hostage to that kind of politics, we wouldn't do anything. We'd be stuck in the mud. We've already created a class of ADUs that don't require fees. This is a modest expansion of that program. And I think I do advocate for option 3. I like staff's idea about addressing the size that you mentioned in the report, restricting the size, so we're not essentially letting new single-family construction begin in the guise of an ADU. I think the owner occupancy is completely legal because what we're doing here is not covered by 881. So our hands are not tied by 881, as was mentioned by one of the speakers. And there are folks in my division that want to move forward with building an ADU, and I would like to see us move forward, without delay. So I would move that we direct staff to develop an ordinance or amend our existing ordinance to eliminate the separate meter and connection fee requirement for new ADUs, provided that they are owner-occupied, that the owner install water-conserving fixtures, including a bathroom, internal, domestic, and irrigation, that we ensure or require that the main structure is owner-occupied, that we require that the developer or applicant be an existing MMWD customer, and that this would apply to an existing MMWD account. I don't think that we should provide this exemption to newly developed homes or ADUs. It's a whole separate financial universe that we're dealing with there. And again, I think, we do have to balance the equity that we're trying to encourage, but discourage speculation. So that's what I would like to see us do.
It seems to me, if we think back to Marcia's situation, that are you sure you want to put a restriction that it has to be the primary house that's owner-occupied? It couldn't be the ADU that's owner-occupied?
I would say the property has to be owner-occupied.
I think that,
It could be either.
It shouldn't matter to
No,
us,
it
right?
could be either one. Correct.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that, actually, and I'm also leaning to the third alternative as the most likely I'm hearing here. Let me ask this, and I have no idea if this, several people commented on speed here. We take time to do things. There's no question about that. But I understand the need for haste. Is it feasible? Does it make any sense to put a freeze on what we're doing right now, at least for some period of time until this gets thrashed out and formalized?
Well, one option that was discussed at the last time this was discussed at the board, and we could proceed, but is prefaced on the idea that we could bring this back, I'm confident, at the March 17th board meeting, which is pretty rapid. The board would have discretion of when the waiving of fees, if that's the direction the board went, could have some retroactivity to it, as well as we could handle urgent needs in the interim through a meter variance that we did with that customer that came to that prior board meeting. So I think most of the issues on timeliness could be handled in context of what I'm saying, with the rather firm target date of March 17th, bringing this back to the board.
That sounds good.
Yeah, that works for me, and I'm also in support of the number 3 alternative. So, we only have one board person who's not here, and I'm sure she would support it. So,
good.
I think we can shoot for the 17th. That would be great. St. Patrick's Day can't be bad.
No.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question, please?
Of course, Paul.
Go ahead, Armando.
And what Ben just said about applying this retroactively that our last meeting toward the end. And so I think
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul. I'll follow up later. Oh, okay. Okay. All righty. So direction clear? Okay.
Okay. Thanks,
Alrighty.
everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, staff.
Number 4. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate your comments. It's always important to us to hear the people that are actually being affected and the people who really believe in it, so we appreciate that.
Thanks for listening.
Our pleasure. We're at your service.
Okay, good morning. A change of direction. I guess we are busy preparing for our next PSPS season. And, you know, everything from ensuring we can receive telemetry out in the system to making sure we have better maps to some of our facilities. Last year, we were able to provide water to all of our customers, even during perhaps what has been the greatest outage of electricity in Marin County.
Hope we always provide water to all of our customers. They're paying for it, so.
Right. And so we're preparing to meet that challenge again in 2020. And to do so, we're proposing to rent again the large 2-megawatt generator for San Geronimo.
Is there any reason we wouldn't approach Peterson, you've heard this from me before, to buy that unit? I mean, is there anything different about that unit than the one we will put in permanently?
Just the number of hours on it. It's got a few hours on it, about 4,000 or 5,000 hours on it, and the cost of that unit, secondhand, is about the same as the cost of a new unit, same Caterpillar brand.
Have you approached Peterson on this particular unit that you don't have to pick it up?
We did. We had an option to purchase last year in the quote, so we know pretty closely what those costs are.
Okay.
Yeah. That said, the equipment worked great, obviously, and we're recommending that we rent from Peterson again, who, you know, they participated in a competitive quote process last year. And so we're seeking the committee's approval to refer this item to the...
I did want to note that, as we've talked about briefly, the design is moving forward for the permanent installation. So we believe rather confidently this will be the last year that we'll be renting it, and we'll have a permanent generator there that, of course, will provide a huge benefit in the event of a non-planned emergency where we won't have the benefit to bring in a rental.
Well, you know, I would suggest strongly discussing this with PG&E. I presume this thing will run on natural gas as well as diesel?
Diesel.
I know it runs on diesel, but I presume it's a diesel. Any diesel can run on natural gas. It puts out less horsepower, but it'll still run on natural gas. I would suggest we pick up the subject with PG&E about bringing gas into the valley. I think there's an interest in the valley for that, at least for the people I've been talking to, there's an interest. So, you know, that would make life a whole lot easier than having to build storage and all that kind of stuff and the potential for leaks and spills.
Well, one of the many interesting that I'll be sharing at the next stock meeting stories from the North Bay fires was we had backup generators in the city of Santa Rosa that were running on natural gas, and early on the lines were secured by PG&E during the fire. So, you know,
shut off.
Yeah. So that was a complication, and they're now converting to diesel.
Well, I don't, you know, my experience with these engines is they can go both ways.
Right.
You know, it's not that complicated.
Right.
The process is basically the same. It's just a lower energy fuel than the diesel. The diesel's, you know, probably 4 times as powerful as natural gas. But I think it's worth looking at because the long-term cost, and this leads to the next thing that I meant to mention the other day when we were talking about this, and I forgot, which is my recommendation is, as an engineer who supplies clients with motors this size or larger, is that you give some serious thought to buying a fuel truck and getting around the dependence, because I'll tell you, if you've ever been tight, and I'm sure you have on these, waiting for the fuel truck, is he going to show up? Is he going to show up? Is he going to show up? And your question was an interesting one too, Jack, about the hiking the price. We haven't seen that, at least I haven't experienced it, but you're sure subject to that. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, what are you going to do? It's $2 a gallon more, it's going to pay it. But the idea is you could be hung out to dry. The more serious issue is how you fit in with everybody else who's on demand. That's the tricky part, is what your usage is versus somebody else who, if they're using 10 times what you're using, guess what happened to your delivery? Adios. So I would give some thought, and I think a used fuel truck would be fine. You could buy a new one if you wish, but I think a used one would be fine. You know, there's plenty of stuff floating around. And that way you control it. You know, you may have to get a different license for somebody to drive it because it's hazardous and, you know, heavyweight and all that. But that's something that can be done just because you control the delivery, not depending on them. And because it's so easy for them to miss a delivery and the engine, off she goes. So thought.
Yeah, it is a difficult spot, those logistics. But we'll have a big tank and several contracts.
Well, for that one, it's simple, but I'm talking about for the other generators, and not so much affecting this one,
right?
But the other ones.
Yeah. So unless there are any other questions, we're seeking the committee's approval and referral to the full board for the recommended action, which is to authorize the general manager to negotiate and execute amendment number 1 with Peterson Power Systems for the rental of the generator.
Armando, any questions? Armando? Lost you in the vapor. Any public comment? Okay, let's roll.
Yeah, I'd move approval, referral to the board. Okay?
Okay, cool.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you all.
Okay.